Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about something that's really the bedrock of any successful career, professional ethics. It's this invisible framework that builds trust, reputation, and at the end of the day, success.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. What really separates a professional from everyone else? I mean, it's not just about a fancy degree or technical skills. At its core, it's about having a shared, reliable standard of behavior. And that's so important when you realize that personal ethics, well, they can be all over the map.
I mean, think about it like this. One person might not think twice about tossing a wrapper on the ground, while for someone else, that's unthinkable. We all come at things from different angles. So, to create that consistency and trust that an entire profession depends on, you need some kind of universal guide.
And that is exactly where the code of ethics comes in. It acts as our professional compass. It's this guide that's built on 5 foundational principles. Think of them as the cardinal directions that help us find our way no matter the situation.
And what's really cool is how our source material describes these principles. They're not just a dry list of rigid rules. Nope, they're framed as 5 precious pearls, 5 core values that really define what it means to be a true professional. So, what are these pearls? Well, you've got integrity, just being straightforward and honest. Objectivity, not letting bias cloud your judgment. Then there's professional competence and due care, basically staying sharp and being careful. Confidentiality, respecting people's privacy. And finally, professional behavior, acting in a way that makes the whole profession look good. These are the absolute non-negotiables.
Let's just zoom in on one of these for a second. Confidentiality. Client and employer data, that is a sacred trust. The source even uses the word amanat, which means something precious that's held in safekeeping. But are there ever exceptions? Can that trust ever be broken?
Well, the answer is yes, but, and this is a big but, only in 3 very specific, very controlled situations. First, if the law straight up demands the information. Second, if your professional body needs it for something like a quality review. And third, if the client themselves gives you clear, explicit permission. Outside of those 3, that trust is absolute. Okay, so you've got the principles, your 5 pearls. But the real world is messy, right? How do you actually use them when you're facing a really tricky situation where the answer isn't black and white?
This is where the code is so brilliant. Instead of trying to give you an endless rulebook for every possible thing that could ever happen, which, let's be honest, is impossible, it gives you a flexible, principle-based framework. It doesn't just tell you what to do, it teaches you how to think. And this framework, it boils down to a really simple 3-step process. First, you identify any potential threats to your ethical principles. Next, you evaluate just how serious those threats are. And finally, you address them. You figure out what safeguards you can put in place to either get rid of them completely or at least shrink them down to a manageable level. All right, so let's put that first step of the framework into practice. Identify. What are some of the common dangers or threats that can knock our professional compass off course? Knowing what to look for is half the battle. These threats usually fall into 5 main buckets. Now, for this explainer, we're just going to focus on the 2 most common ones. Self-interest, which is when you have a personal stake in something, and self-review, where you're basically asked to check your own work. First up, the big one, the self-interest threat. This is what happens whenever some financial or other personal interest could, maybe compromise your professional judgment. It's that classic, what's in it for me kind of dilemma.
So what does this actually look like? Well, it could be owning shares in a company you're supposed to be auditing, or having a big loan with the client. It could even be depending way too much on the fees from just one client, or accepting a really lavish gift. All these things create a personal stake that can make it really hard to stay objective.
Okay, next up is a really subtle one, but it's super powerful, the self-review threat. This is what happens when you're put in a position where you have to evaluate or reevaluate your own previous work.
I mean, let's be real. It's pretty much impossible to be objective when you're marking your own homework, right? Imagine trying to find mistakes in financial statements that you helped put together, or trying to find weaknesses in a system that you designed. The conflict is baked right in.
So as we're navigating all these different threats, there's one principle that just stands above all the rest. It's our anchor, our unshakable true north on that professional compass. And that principle is integrity.
But we have to ask a tough question here. We all know integrity is critical. But in the real world, with all its pressures and temptations, what are the forces that actually push people to compromise it? The source material really nails it down to 3 powerful fundamental drivers: greed, fear, and that hunger for power. These are the big temptations that can lead even the most well-intentioned people astray.
So let's start with greed. The source puts this so perfectly. The chase for more is a race with no finish line. The second you get the 1-canal house, you start looking at the 2-canal house. True satisfaction, it says, doesn't come from getting more stuff, it comes from being content.
Now, how about fear? That fear of losing a client, or even your job if you stand your ground and do the right thing. But the source makes such a great point. As a skilled professional, your skills are in high demand. The fear of losing one opportunity for upholding your principles, it's often just an illusion.
So you have to think about the long game. Who attracts the better clients? Who builds a career that actually lasts? The professional whose word is their bond builds a real, lasting reputation. The one taking shortcuts, they're only ever building something temporary.
And this all leads to the ultimate takeaway from the source material. In a world where trust is so hard to find, integrity isn't a liability. It's a brand. It becomes your most powerful, most valuable professional asset, period.
Because in the end, that professional compass, it's in your hands. How you decide to use it, the direction you let it point, that doesn't just define your career, it defines your character.